Put on your headphones, turn off every distraction, and for the next few minutes, listen as if you're uncovering a pattern in your own life that you've been repeating without ever realizing it. Now, let's begin. There's a pattern that shows up across people who make real financial progress, and then, without any external event forcing it, quietly undo it. Not through one dramatic mistake, through a series of small decisions that, from the outside, look almost designed to bring the number back down to where it was before. Because in a very real sense, they are, just not by any conscious plan. Nobody sits down and decides to sabotage their own progress. That's precisely what makes this worth examining closely. The mechanism runs quietly enough that it rarely ever announces itself as sabotage while it's actually happening. Tonight, 5 reasons the brain treats sudden financial progress as a problem to be corrected, and the correction is usually paid for by whoever it happens to. Reason 1. Sudden financial progress can register as a threat to belonging, not an improvement to life. For most of human history, standing out economically from the group you depended on for survival carried real social risk, resentment, exclusion, a target on your back. That risk isn't relevant to modern life in the same way, but the underlying wiring that flags it hasn't caught up to that fact. This is why some people feel a genuine, hard-to-explain discomfort right around the point their financial situation starts visibly outpacing the people they grew up around. The discomfort doesn't announce itself as fear of exclusion. It shows up as a vague guilt, an urge to downplay the progress, or a series of purchases that happen to bring the visible gap back down to something more familiar. None of this requires the people around someone to have actually said anything critical at all. The mechanism doesn't wait for real disapproval to activate. It runs on the anticipated possibility of it, which is often enough on its own to trigger behavior that quietly closes the gap before anyone else even notices it opened. Reason 2. The brain weighs a guaranteed small comfort more heavily than a probable large gain, even when the math clearly favors the gain. This is loss aversion in its most ordinary form, not the dramatic kind involving large sums, but the daily kind, where a small known pleasure right now consistently beats a larger uncertain benefit later, because the small pleasure is certain, and certainty gets weighted heavily regardless of size. This is why a modest but guaranteed comfort can consistently outcompete a significantly larger but probabilistic outcome, decision after decision, even among people who would say, if asked directly, that they understand the math points the other way. Understanding the math was never the missing piece. The weighting happens before the math gets consulted at all. This is also why so much financial advice that leads with numbers alone fails to change behavior. The math was rarely in dispute. What actually needs adjusting is the automatic weighting itself, recognizing, in the moment, a small, certain comfort is being chosen. That certainty is doing more of the persuading than the actual value of what's being chosen. Reason 3. A known bad outcome often feels safer to the brain than an unknown good one, because uncertainty itself reads as danger, independent of what the uncertain outcome actually is. Staying at the same financial level is familiar, even when that level is genuinely difficult. Moving to a meaningfully better level is unfamiliar, and unfamiliar territory activates the same basic alertness, whether what's waiting there is good or bad. The nervous system doesn't distinguish unknown and wonderful from unknown and dangerous, nearly as cleanly as we assume it does. This is part of why some people unconsciously recreate financial conditions they say they want to escape. The known version, however uncomfortable, has already been survived. The better unknown version hasn't been tested yet, and the brain treats untested as risky by default, regardless of the odds. This shows up most clearly right at the edge of genuine change, the first time someone earns meaningfully more than they ever have, or spends down debt further than they ever have. That edge tends to produce anxiety that has nothing to do with any real new threat. It's simply the discomfort of crossing into territory the nervous system has no prior experience surviving, however good that territory objectively is. Reason 4. Many people carry an unspoken ceiling for how much they believe they deserve to have, and spending adjusts automatically to keep the balance near that ceiling. Nobody consciously decides this. It shows up instead as a mysterious tendency for expenses to rise right alongside income, for unexpected costs to appear right after a raise, for the number in the account to keep landing in roughly the same range, no matter how much more comes in over time. This ceiling usually formed early, often from watching how money was talked about and handled growing up, long before there was any capacity to evaluate whether that model was accurate. It rarely gets examined directly, because it doesn't announce itself as a belief. It just quietly sets the thermostat, and spending rises or falls to match whatever temperature it's set to. Raising that ceiling deliberately is possible, but it rarely happens through willpower alone. It tends to happen by proximity, spending real time around a genuinely different model of what's normal, until the old thermostat setting starts to feel arbitrary rather than fixed. Reason 5. An unexpected windfall creates a kind of internal friction, and spending it away is often the fastest way to resolve that friction. A sudden influx of money that doesn't match someone's internal sense of how much money someone like me has creates a quiet discomfort, not unlike wearing clothes that don't fit the occasion. Spending the windfall down toward the familiar baseline resolves that discomfort quickly, even though it undoes the actual progress the windfall represented. This is why windfalls so often disappear faster than income earned gradually. Gradual income gets absorbed slowly enough that the internal baseline has time to adjust upward with it. A windfall arrives all at once, faster than the internal baseline can update, and the gap between the new number and the old self-image gets closed the only way available in the moment, by spending until the two match again. This is also why financial advice that only addresses the windfall itself, invest it, save it, don't touch it, so often fails in practice. The advice is aimed at the money. The actual friction it's competing with is aimed at identity, and identity rarely loses to a spreadsheet. None of these 5 reasons make anyone careless or undisciplined. They're old wiring, built for circumstances that no longer apply, still running quietly underneath decisions that look financial, but are actually about belonging, safety, and self-image. The wiring doesn't go away by knowing about it once, but it does lose a significant amount of its power the moment it's recognized in real time. A ceiling you've named is a ceiling you can consciously decide to test, instead of one silently enforcing itself in the background. So the next time progress starts to feel strangely uncomfortable, right when things are finally going well, don't assume something is wrong. That discomfort is usually a sign the wiring noticed the change before you consciously did. Noticing it back is often enough to keep it from making the decision for you. Ask instead which of these 5 reasons just quietly walked into the room.